Wanda, I have 10:01. Do you want to get started?
Yes, I will do that shortly. Let me get my camera on. Okay. Yes, it's 10:01. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I see all of our speakers are on the line, so we're ready to go. So good morning, everyone. I'm Rhonda Thompson. I am the Chief of the Bureau of Air Quality at the South Carolina Department, formerly DHEC. First of all, we wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. This is our third meeting. The first two meetings we had were in North Augusta. Those were hybrid meetings. We met in person, and we also had a virtual line option. So many of you joined us for those two meetings. And this will be our third meeting. We thought today's meeting would be relatively short, so we decided to do all virtual this time. And we thank you again for joining us again. The agenda is on your screen, so we're going to run right through it. We have two sets of presentations, and then we have open discussion Q&A session. After that, we're going to have the chat feature open throughout the meeting. So if you have written questions, written comments, you can send those throughout the meeting. And then when we get to the Q&A session, we will answer those questions. And then if you want to raise your hand at that point and ask a question, we will unmute you and give you an opportunity to state your name and say your question or your comment, and we'll answer questions at that time. So we are going to go ahead and call on our first speaker, Mary Peyton Wall. And thank you again for joining us today. And then we'll have our second speaker, Dr. Boylan, and then we'll come back and do the open discussion Q&A session. Thank you again for joining us.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I think Catherine's pulling my slides up for me.
Yes, they are. There you go.
All right. We can go ahead to the next slide. All right. So good morning. Just kind of as a reminder of where we are. The EPA lowered the annual primary NAAQS for PM 2.5 from 12.0 to 9.0. And this was done a year ago, a little over a year ago. And they left the 24-hour standard and the PM10 standard unchanged. All right, next slide. All right, so kind of where are we on this timeline? We are on kind of that first line right there. It says the plus 1 year. So by February 7th, 2025, all states should have submitted their designation letter to the EPA. South Carolina submitted ours towards the end of January, and then Jim will be discussing the Georgia one. So next steps. If the EPA plans to modify any designations, they will do what's called a 120-day, sorry, go back one more. Go back one. Thank you. If they plan to go to modify, they'll do what's called a 120-day letter, and that will be by October 10th, 2025. And that would be to notify any states that they plan to change from what their recommendation was. And then final designations will be due to the states by February 7th, 2026. And then by February 7th, 2027, infrastructure SIPs will be due to the EPA, which is what South Carolina anticipates having to do. All right, next slide. All right, so February 7, 2025. So that was just last week was the deadline. And the to classify as attainment or non-attainment, our designations were based on 2021, 2022, and 2023 monitoring data. And then the EPA again has their 12 months to agree or disagree, and their final designations will be based on 2022, 2023, and 2024 monitoring data. It is possible that if the EPA doesn't feel there's enough monitoring data, they could deem an area unclassifiable. And just to top it all off, South Carolina has no air monitors with a design value greater than 9.0 micrograms per meter cubed. And we have recommended every county to be designated attainment for the revised standard. And last slide. And this is just a map of where our monitors are and what the current design values are for all of them. And you can see over there in the purple is our Trenton monitor, and it was at 8.1. And I believe that Georgia is reporting that same information with their designation. And that is all I have. I can either answer questions now or we can wait until the question and answer period.
Yeah, we're gonna do all the questions at the Q&A.
Okay.
But I do see some questions are coming in the chat, so we can go ahead and look at those and be ready to answer those.
Okay.
During the Q&A. So Jim, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am ready.
Okay.
Do I need to share my slides, or was someone going to share them for me?
I'm pulling them up for you right now.
Okay, great.
They're loading. There you go. So
All right.
Dr. Boylan, if you want to go through them yourself, you can hit the take control button. Otherwise, I'm happy to do it. Just let me know when to advance.
Okay. Let's see. I haven't done that before. Let's see.
Okay, just let me know and I'll do it for you.
Okay,
That'll
sounds
work.
good. Perfect.
Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. Jim Boylan here, Chief of the Air Protection Branch here at Georgia EPD. And I'll be talking about PM 2.5 designation recommendations for Georgia, along with exceptional event demonstrations. And unfortunately, our situation is a little more complex than the South Carolina situation, and hence my presentation is going to be significantly longer to kind of explain what we've done with our designation recommendations and our exceptional events. Next slide. So, of course, as Mary Payton was saying, it all starts with the PM 2.5 measurements and the monitors. This map shows the map of PM 2.5 monitors across the state of Georgia. We have a lot of monitors in our different areas. We have a combination of the federal reference method monitors. Those are the red triangles. Federal reference method, that measures the 24-hour value. It's a filter-based method where someone has to go put a filter out there. It collects 24 hours worth of data. Then the filter is sent away to a lab and it's reweighed, and we usually don't get the answer back for maybe 2 or 3 months later. And so that's kind of the gold standard for doing PM 2.5 measurements. We also have a number of the FEM monitors, the federal equivalency method monitors. Those are shown through the green circles. The advantage of those is that you get hourly measurements, which are very useful, especially when you're doing exceptional events. So you get the hourly values instead of just a single 24-hour value. You also get the data instantaneously. In fact, it is fed to our website where you can go and look at real time what the hourly value is at each of these monitors. And it costs a lot less money in that we don't have to be buying filters and having someone going out there to switch out filters and paying to have filters shipped away and weighed. So it's FEMs are much cheaper. As you can see, we have many of them co-located. So the disadvantage of the FEMs is that they're reading significantly higher than the FRMs. Like I said, the FRMs are the gold standard. And that wasn't an issue when the standard was 12 micrograms, but it is an issue now that it's 9 micrograms. EPA did come up with, it worked with the vendor to come up with a fix. However, that fix is only a partial fix, and there is still some significant issues with much of the FEM data. In fact, 4 of our monitors have been completely invalidated because the FEM values were so much higher than the FRM values at the co-located. But that's for another discussion on another. So these are our official 2021 to 2023 PM2.5 design values across the state of Georgia. Each monitor has a value. The design value is the highest value in the MSA. So what you can see from the map is we actually have 6 areas that are above 9.0. We have a couple of them at 10.0. In the Augusta area, the Augusta monitor is reading 9.7, and then the one on the South Carolina side is reading 8.1. So the design value for Augusta is 9.7. So, you know, at first glance at this map, it looks pretty dim or dismal for designations for Georgia. However, if we go to the next slide, in 2016, EPA did issue the exceptional events rule. And the exceptional events rule is going to come into play here. Exceptional events are unusual or naturally occurring events that can affect air quality but are not reasonably controllable. When EPA concurs with an exceptional event, that data can be excluded from the design value used for comparison to the NACs. And in this case, it would be the annual NACs for PM2.5. PM2.5 exceedances caused by wildfires, prescribed fires, and holiday fireworks are eligible for exclusion under the exceptional events rule. So the concept is if you can identify exceptional events, have EPA concur, and have that data removed from the design value calculation, if you remove enough days, your design value can go from above 9 down to 9.0, and you can have the area designated attainment. Next slide. So this slide shows the number of exceptional event demonstrations that we have submitted to EPA in each of those areas in order to bring the area from above 9.0. So in the case of Augusta, from 9.7 down to 9.0, we have submitted 40 exceptional event demonstrations. Across the whole state of Georgia, we submitted 129. We actually worked with ADEM. We actually share an MSA with in the Columbus area, Phoenix City. So we worked with ADEM and basically helped them write 22 exceptional events. So in total, Georgia really worked on 151 exceptional events. But what I'll really focus on is the ones in Augusta for our call today. Next slide. So this just shows if EPA concurs with all those exceptional events that I just showed, that all of our design values would be at 9 or lower. And hence, you know, we did assume EPA would concur with our exceptional events. And when we did our designation recommendations last Friday and recommended every county in Georgia, including counties in and around Augusta, as attainment for the standard. Next slide. So this is a breakdown, a little more detail of the exceptional event demonstrations by monitor location and by type. You know, we did have a number of Canadian wildfire exceptional events. Those were all in 2023. We specifically had 8 of those that we had identified for the Augusta area. We had 29 exceptional events related to prescribed fires, and then 3 exceptional events related to holiday fireworks. Next slide. So this goes into the individual days. I said there was 40 exceptional event days. These are all the days in 2021. There were a lot of days in 2021, mostly related to prescribed fires. 2 days, July 4th and 5th, were both impacted by holiday fireworks. Those are indicated by the pink highlight. Next slide. And for 2022 and 2023, the exceptional events, it was kind of a mixed bag. There were some prescribed fires identified with no highlights, the Canadian wildfires with the yellow highlights, and then again, another impact on July 4th from holiday fireworks. And then at the very bottom, you can see that our design value is 9.7 without EPA concurrence, but with EPA concurrence on the exceptional events, it would be 9.0. Next slide. So this is kind of graphically, EPA asked us to look at 5 years worth of data. We use these 5 years worth of data to determine different tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, where the line between tier 2 and tier 3 is the 98th percentile of the data with the exceptional events or high values that are flagged excluded from that calculation. And then the tier 1 value is 1.5 times the 98th percentile value. So looking at the 5 years worth of data, we can see that our separation between tier 1 and tier 2. So anything above 19.79 would be a tier 1 day. A tier 1 day requires less evidence in order to make a causal relationship and have EPA concur with the exceptional event. If it's a tier 2 day, so that's between 13 and 19.8, those values would need some additional evidence, usually 2 additional pieces of evidence in addition to the evidence for the tier 1 in order to make the case that they should be excluded. And then the tier 3 days, which are much more difficult to get excluded through exceptional events, requires even more evidence. But what you can see here is we did have a lot of high days in 2021. And so we did, a fair amount of exceptional events for 2021. We only did 2 for 2022, and then we did, a fair amount for 2023. It should be noted that the 2021, Mary Payton mentioned that, the initial designations are based on 21, 22, and 23 design values. However, the final designations that are done by EPA will be based on 22, 23, and 24 data. And our 2024 data has not, it's been collected, but it has not been certified yet. So we don't know what our design value is for 2020, based on including 2024 data. And all of those 2021 exceptional events, EPA probably will not even act on them because their final designations are going to be based on 22, 23, and 24. Next slide. So now I'm going to jump into one example for each of the 3 types of exceptional events. So the first is, and we put packets together. So this was our packet that was submitted last Friday to EPA, prescribed fire exceptional event demonstration for exceedances of the 2024 annual PM 2.5 NAAQS in Augusta in 2021, 22, and 23. Next slide. So this packet is going to talk about all 29 prescribed fire exceptional events, but I'm just going to go through one as an example. But the prescribed fire exceptional events of the 3 type that I'm going to talk about today is probably the most complicated one. Having prescribed fires as an exceptional event is a new thing. Only one prescribed fire exceptional event has ever been submitted and approved to EPA. And so we're submitting 29 of them, and only one's ever been approved. And the one that was approved was out west in California, which is the prescribed fire out west is much different than the prescribed fire down in the southeast. Out west, it's a lot of federal land managers doing very large burns. In the southeast, it's a lot of private landowners doing a bunch of small burns. And so it's really 2 completely different things. So, not only was there not a lot of examples to go from, we kind of had to figure out how the one that was done out west was different than the one in the southeast as we went through this. But these are the elements. It needs a conceptual model of the event, public notification and education, clear causal relationship, where you compare it to historical data. It says date, should say data, historical data. Ambient measurements and modeling, human activity unlikely to reoccur, in which case we can use the natural fire return interval map to mimic what nature is doing. Not reasonably controllable or preventable. EPA says we can use our smoke management program and our state wildlife action plans for those, and then public comments. Next slide. So our conceptual model for the 29 prescribed fires, what we did was we actually created what we call integrated plots, and they include the NOAA hazardous mapping system, smoke plumes, high split trajectory modeling, location of the prescribed burns, both from Georgia and South Carolina. And the hourly PM 2.5 time series plots are used to clearly demonstrate that smoke from nearby prescribed fires conducted on the day of the exceedance and or the day before the exceedance were transported to the, that should be to the Augusta monitor causing the exceedance. And I'll talk about that more in a couple of slides. Next slide. So for the public notification, which was one of the requirements, our Georgia Forestry Commission has a public website with an interactive wildfire and burn permit map that contains the current air quality index, the AQI, at all monitors in Georgia, with the option to add additional layers, which includes burn restrictions, the daily burn permits, which is what I'm going to talk about. That's a very important feature. The daily burn permits. So each day you can go and see what permits are issued, how many acres, and exactly where they are. The PM 2.5 concentration, the NOAA HMS smoke plumes, wind vectors, which is also a very important part. So if you can actually see where the permits are being issued and then the wind vectors, which way the wind is blowing, the public is able to go and determine if there's a possibility that they may get a smoke plume, and then they can protect themselves. And then there's also a smoke forecast option. And it's an interactive map that the public can zoom in or zoom out of. And the website is at the bottom of this slide. But if you go to the next slide, this is kind of a screenshot of what it looks like. You can look at the whole state of Georgia. Each of the green circles are permits that were issued. I believe this was yesterday. So permits that were issued yesterday are the green dots. You have the AQI in the circles. And then what you can do is you can zoom in. And so what I've kind of done is zoomed in on the right to the Augusta area. And you can actually click on the wind vectors, and then the wind vectors show up. And so the little green dots are the fires. And then if you click on the little green dots, it will actually tell you the purpose of the burn and the number of acres. So I can't read that, but I think that's 40 acres is the one in the top left that is kind of has the window there. So based on that, the public can see, is it going to be a large burn or a small burn, and which way the winds are projected to go. South Carolina actually has a very similar map to this one. I'm not going to show that here, but South Carolina has a map that has the active permits as well. Next slide. So for public education, we did it through our website. The EPD website has a link to the Georgia Forestry Commission interactive burn permit map. We also have links. We have a whole section dedicated to prescribed burning. And so we also have a link to EPA's Air Now Fire and Smoke Map, which is a national product that shows satellite detected fires as well as HMS smoke plumes on a map that is interactive and can be zoomed in. EPA's when smoke is in the air, things you should do to protect yourself when smoke is in the air, when you see it or smell it. How to prepare for fire season. EPA's smoke ready toolbox for wildfires, and then the Georgia DNR Wildlife Resource Division prescribed fire information. So these were all information to help educate the public. Next slide. So I said we had to do comparisons to the historical data. So that's what this slide does. What we do is we look at 5 years worth of historical data. So the first column is the date, and then the second column is the exceptional event concentration. Most of them are in the 20s, but you can see some up into the 40s and the 50s. And then what we do is compare it to the 5-year annual average, the 5-year quarterly average, and the 5-year monthly average. And then we create ratios to see how much higher the exceptional event value is compared to the historical data, which is required through the guidance. And in most cases, it's at least double. And in some cases, it can be as high as 5 times higher. Next slide. So this is 2021 data. This is for 22 and 2023 data. Again, most of the values are in the 20s and low 30s. The same type of comparison where the ratios are anywhere from double to triple what the historical data is. And that basically shows that it's unusual and exceptional. Next slide, please. We looked at the burn permits that were issued in the Augusta area within 100 kilometers. In this case, 135 burns were conducted within a 100-kilometer radius. We didn't want to show all of those, but what we did do is basically look at the top 20 on the left, and on the right, we're looking at the bottom 20. And what we see is that the top 20 are almost all exclusively silviculture burns and military burns. With, there's some large burns there. There's a 5,000 acre burn, and then a 3,700 military burn. Both of those are actually relatively close to each other. And then the bottom 20 are typically more like land clearing and storm debris and some very small wildfires. Next slide. So we're able to take that information, in fact, take all the burn permits and put them on a map. And so these are what we call our integrated plots. This is one example for March 3rd of 2022. And one of the first things I like to look at on these plots is the time series at the bottom. So if you look at the bottom, we have the time series of the hourly PM2.5 for the day before on the left, and then the day of the exceedance on the right. And what we can see is that, starting at midnight, the day of the exceedance, the concentrations were already very high at the Augusta monitor, which indicates that smoke had been transported to the monitor from fires performed on the day before. So fires the day before created smoke that impacted the monitor on the next day. Later on, as the mixing height got higher, the concentrations came down. You can see that on the middle of the time series on the right. And then later on, it started creeping up again, and that was due to fires on the day of. So this is a case where the exceedance was a combination of fires on the day before and the day of. So once we look at the time series, we can look at the integrated plots at the top. First of all, the first thing to notice is that there's a lot of smoke from the HMS smoke plumes from the satellite. Those are the shades of gray. You can actually even see smoke plumes coming out of some of where some of the permits have been issued. So the green circles are silviculture and silviculture burns, which are eligible for exceptional events. The size of the circle is associated with the number of acres that have been permitted. And then what we can do is look at the locations of the burn permits, and then we also add the high split back trajectories. So those are the colored lines going back in time to see where the parcels of air passed over. And what we can see is that, a lot of the parcels of air were passing over some of these large fires, both the day before and the day of. The color of the high split trajectories are associated with the AQI code. So if the hourly value is between 9 and 35, it's yellow. If it's above 35, it's orange. And then if it's above the next threshold, it's red. And what you can see is that the red value, which is the highest value of it all, passed very closely to those very large fires that were over 1,000 acre fires nearby on the day of the exceedance. So these trajectories are at 100-meter height. Next slide. We also created the same plot using 500-meter back trajectories. Typically if the fire is nearby, the 100-meter trajectories are usually the more reliable ones, but for further away transport, usually the 500 meters might be better. So we have provided both as part of our demonstration. Next slide. And then what we did is we did a write-up, a very short write-up. There were so many of these that we were trying to find ways to streamline the demonstrations. And so, these integrated plots, we ended up, our modeling team ended up writing a code that could generate these automatically, so we could start generating a lot of these plots to study. And then we did a short write-up for each of them. And basically this write-up describes what I talked about, the number of acres the day before, the number of the day of, that there was 133 permits covering over 6,000 acres issued the day before, and 135 permits covering over 14,000 acres issued the day of, and 94% of those were from silviculture burns. Next slide. So the other elements, we have to talk about the not likely to reoccur, which is one of the requirements of the exceptional events rule. And the way to do that is to look at the natural fire return interval. This is a map from Gouet from 2012, and we're going to focus in on the southeast. Next slide. So this is the same map blown up for Georgia and then blown up for the Augusta area. And that what we can see is that the natural or the natural historic fire return interval is really anywhere from 2 to 6 years in this area. And so what we wanted to do is see if the actual fire return interval was similar to that or higher. What you don't want to do is be doing prescribed fires that are more frequent than the natural fire return interval. But if it's the same or less frequent, then that meets the criteria. Next slide. So, so we did look at we used the U.S. Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Database to look at the tree stands within 100 kilometers of the Augusta monitor. Longleaf and slash at 7%, loblolly shortleaf at 48%, oak pine mix at 10%, and oak hickory at 21%. And along with those are the typical burn frequencies associated with those. Next slide. Then we tried to, so we did not have the actual fire return interval or actual burn frequency for each individual burn. Like I said, there were hundreds of burns on these days, and then we had to do hundreds of demonstrations. So we're talking thousands of fires. So what we did was we calculated a value or estimated a value for each county based on the, basically we took the rural acres associated with each county and divided it by the average, the 5-year average of burn acres to estimate a actual fire return interval for each county, and then compare that to the 2 to 6 from the Gouet map. And as you can see here, in most cases, what's happening is much higher than the 2 to 6. Richmond County is the lowest at 11.7. These are the Georgia counties. Next slide. These are the South Carolina counties. Again, they're not really closer to the 2 to 6. In fact, our Georgia Forestry Commission keeps saying we got to do a lot more burning than we're currently doing to keep up with the natural fire return interval. But the average across all the counties is 45, which is significantly higher and than the 2 to 6 from the natural. Next. So not reasonably controllable. The EPA guidance says if a state has a state certified smoke management plan, that meets that element. We have one in Georgia. Ours was certified back in 2008. It includes 5 sections: authorization for prescribed burning, which means our Georgia Forestry Commission gives permits. People can't just burn whenever they want. They have to apply for a permit. It gets evaluated. And if the burning conditions are right, then they are issued a permit. there's smoke management. So the SMP talks about good smoke management practices, public education and awareness, surveillance and enforcement, and smoke management plan evaluation. So all these are detailed in our smoke management plan. Next slide. Not reasonably preventable. So for this one, like I said, the prescribed fires are kind of a new way of looking at exceptional events. EPA has said that if we can describe the benefits that would have been foregone if the prescribed burns were not conducted, it would meet the element of not reasonably preventable. And so to do that, we have pointed to Georgia's State Wildlife Action Plan, which is our statewide strategy to conserve populations of native wildlife species and habitats for animals, plants, and places as they become more rare. So the Georgia SWAP talks about a lot of animals and plants, some listed here. I've got the website for that down below. But if we go to the next slide, we did do some additional analysis looking at the biotics database, where we actually identified the top 3 rare fire-dependent animal species located within a 100-kilometer radius of the Augusta monitor. And those are shown here. They're the frosted flatwoods salamander, the red cockaded woodpecker, and the gopher tortoise. Next slide. So that's the prescribed fires. The only element I hadn't talked about was the public comments, which was the last piece of it. And I'm going to talk about that at the end, because we did put this out for public comment all on the same day. And our public comments basically covered all of our demonstrations, not only Augusta, but all the other locations, but also our wildfire and our holiday fireworks. So I'll talk about the comments at the end. So the next was the Canadian wildfire exceptional event demonstrations for Augusta. Next slide. There were 8 of those. Those are listed here. Again, we have to do the comparison to the historic data. So again, we look at the 5-year annual average, quarterly average, and monthly average. And in all cases, it's at least double, sometimes almost triple those. So showing that the values are higher than usual. Next slide. So these are maps of Canadian wildfires. The one example I'm going to use is June 10th of 2023. So what this map shows is Canadian wildfires on June 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. Next slide. We also looked at NOAA HMS fires and smoke. So this is satellite detect. You can see the large Canadian wildfires, the large plumes of smoke. So again, we're looking at the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, where the 7th is the top left, the 8th is top right, 9th is bottom left, and the 10th is top right, bottom right. And what we can see is that smoke from the Canadian wildfires is making its way down into the eastern US. Next slide. We did run high split back trajectories. This back trajectory for 3 different heights, we did the 100-meter to look at what's happening close to the ground, but then we did a 1,500-meter and a 300-meter trajectories, and it's really the 1,500 and probably the 3,000-meter trajectory in the red that are the most useful here, and they show the trajectories going back to the Canadian wildfires. These are 72-hour back trajectories, and then what you can also see are the AQI values at the different monitors, and you can see all the yellow that's passing through. Next slide. So we also zoomed in. Typically on a normal day, PM is 10 to 15 or less. As you can see here, there's widespread high values of above 20 micrograms, which is very unusual to have widespread values over 20. So this basically shows the regional nature of the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. Next slide. And then this is a time series plot. So this shows the day before on the top and the day of. And these plots, I think, look a lot different than the plots I showed for the prescribed fires, where you had very low values, and then it peaks up to some very high values for a number of hours, and then goes back down to very low values. This is showing, for the 2-day period, that the PM 2.5 was elevated throughout the day, during the night, before the mixing height breaks, after the mixing height breaks, and so all the values are constantly over 20 micrograms for the full two-day period. Next slide. And then we do a write-up, and I'm not going to read through this, but this basically talks about all the plots that I just talked about for June 10th, and then we went through a similar exercise for the other 8 days. Next slide. And then the third category was the holiday fireworks exceptional events. Next slide. So we had 3 days. 2 of them are in 2021 that most likely EPA will not act on the 2021 days, but the 2023 day likely will get acted on. So that's July 4th of 2023. Again, we did the comparison to the historical data, where it's basically double the historical value. Next slide. We did need to document fireworks in the Augusta area on July 4th, 2023. So we found this on the website. One of my staff did. It indicates some fires that were going to be going on. Let's see. I can read this. At the SRP Park after the baseball game, there was going to be fireworks, and then there was going to be fireworks at the Story Mills Road Baptist Church at 7:00 p.m. And there were some other celebrations, but it did not mention fireworks. There were some fireworks on July 3rd as well, at the Burke County Rec Center. So go to the next slide. So we wanted to look at the location of the monitor versus some of these locations. So to the north was the ballpark. To the south and southwest was the church. Both that were specifically mentioned for fireworks on July 4th, with the distance here. So we could see the location of the fireworks relative to the monitor. Next slide. We did our high split. And if you look at the top right high split, well, actually, before we do that, if we look at the time series, you can see, is very, the concentrations were very low. And then, shortly after 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, they start to spike up to very high values, extremely high, and then they start to die off as the smoke starts to dissipate, which is in line with what you would expect for the timing of the fireworks. Also, if you look at the top right integrated plot, you see that for the high values, the winds were coming from the south and southwest, which was the location of the church fireworks. Next slide. We also did wind rows. These are actually wind rows with concentration values. So the dark colors means that that's when the high concentrations occurred. And so when the high concentrations occurred, the winds were coming from the south and the southwest, again, which was the location of the church. Next slide, where the fireworks were. We also looked at speciation data. So our speciation monitor can look at speciated PM 2.5, the different components, sulfate, nitrate, organic carbon, elemental carbon. Unfortunately, it only measures every 1 in 6 days. So we did not have July 4th. But if you look at the bottom left corner, the very first bar is July 5th, which is the day after, which would have had some residual fireworks smoke in the early morning hours being collected. And what you can see is the lines, the blue and the purple lines, that is potassium. Potassium is a component of fireworks. And you can see that the potassium is 6 times higher on July 5th than it is any other day of the year. If we had actually taken measurements on July 4th, my guess is it probably would have been 10 or 20 times higher, but all we had was July 5th. So again, more additional evidence, the high potassium, that fireworks were the cause of the high value. Next slide. Oh, and then we basically did a short write-up like we did for each of the days, documenting that fireworks was the cause. Next slide. So we did, one of the requirements is to put our exceptional events out, all 40 of them for Augusta, for public comment. So we did put those out for 30-day public comment starting on December 21st. We collected comments till January 21st of 2025. We got 4 sets of comments. Midwest Ozone Group and Tall Timbers both submitted comments in support of our exceptional event demonstrations, saying they thought we provided adequate evidence to support our conclusions. We did get some other comments from Southern Environmental Law Center and US EPA. The gist of those comments, and I'm just going to summarize them at a high level, was in some cases they thought that additional evidence needed to be added in order to strengthen our arguments. So as part of our response to comments, we did actually go in and add additional evidence for all of our write-ups. For example, initially we just had 100-meter back trajectories for prescribed fire. We added the 500-meter trajectories. So we basically doubled the number of trajectories and looked at the 500-meter height in addition to the 100-meter height. And for the Canadian wildfires, we actually, instead of just doing one high split trajectory, we actually, and that was at the beginning of the day, we actually did one in the middle of the extinct day and one at the end of the extinct day, so we could actually look at, provide more evidence. We also did not have the hourly time series for the Canadian wildfires, and all those were added in response to the comments of adding additional evidence to support our conclusion. One other comment from EPA was that they did not necessarily agree with our tier 1, tier 2 thresholds and categorizing our days as they thought some of our tier 1 days should be tier 2 days. And, we justified why we think they should be tier 1 days and put that into our response. But the other thing we said was, a tier 2 day requires 3 pieces of evidence. For all of our tier 1 days and all of our 2 tier days, we did 3 pieces of evidence regardless of if it was a tier 1 or tier 2 day. So even if it was a tier 2 day instead of a tier 1 day, we believe we have already provided the 3 pieces of evidence necessary to support our conclusions. So we did respond to our comments and submit our final versions of our exceptional events to EPA on February 7th, which was last Friday, which is the same day we submitted our recommendations that all counties in Georgia will be attainment. Next slide. This is my last slide. So this is kind of going forward into round 2. Mary Payton talked a little bit about kind of future dates. But for Georgia, we do plan to, the final designations are going to be based on 22, 23, and 24 PM2.5 data that is certified. We already have the 22 and the 23 data. The 2024 data has not been certified yet. We plan to certify that by the end of the month. We hope to have it certified by February 28th, if not the first week of March. And at that point, we can start working on our exceptional event demonstrations for the 2024 data. In fact, we may also go back and relook at some of our 22 and 23 exceptional events, and we may enhance them even further, or we may even identify better days for exceptional events and replace some of the 22 or 23 days with different days. So all that's going to kick up at the beginning of March. Again, any exceptional events will have to go out for a 30-day public comment period, and then we'll have to address comments and have it all wrapped up and submitted to EPA by September 30th with our initial notification and our exceptional event demonstration submitted to EPA. EPA will then send out 120-day letters on October 9th with their preliminary designations. They'll take public comment. That will go out for public comment, and they will do the final designations by February 6th of 2026. And I think that's my last slide. I think my last slide is just my contact info. So with that, I am done, and I'll turn it back over to Rhonda.
Thank you, Jim, for that presentation. Also, thanks to Mary Payton for hers. We're going to go into the Q&A portion of the agenda. We had some questions come in through the chat, and some of them have been answered with a written response, but So we'll go through those first. First question was, how much headroom does the MSA have or will have? And then a follow-up was, will Georgia EPD require exception events for PM 2.5 2024 monitoring data and compliance? Greg Keena, who is our modeling manager in South Carolina, responded to the headroom question on the South Carolina side. He said that we are using the Trenton background data, which is 7.1 micrograms per cubic meter for annual after atypical activities were excluded, and for air dispersion modeling, which leaves 1.8 micrograms per cubic meter headroom for modeling on the South Carolina side. And Deanna responded to the question about the exceptional events for 2024. And I think, Jim, you covered this in your presentation. You said you don't have the 24 data certified yet. The filter data takes a few months to get back and review. And as Jim mentioned, we'll be reviewing that data soon. And any exception events are required for 2022 to 2024. We'll be submitting those by September. So there's additional a question about. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I can speak about the headroom in Georgia, since before we get too far away from that, we're going to do something similar. So in the past, we used to use, or a lot of times people use the design value for the nearest monitor as the PSD background value, which in this case, if all the values are at 9.0, there's 0 headroom. We will be using a similar approach that South Carolina is using. Background monitors with atypical activities removed. I don't know what our value is specifically for Augusta at this point, but it will be significantly lower than 9.0, and we do believe it will leave significant headroom for new industry to come in. So, and I'd have to talk to our modelers specifically to get the value that they're currently using for there, but it will be significantly lower than 9.0.
Okay. There was a question about getting copies of the slides. We will be sending those out after the meeting. I think I saw one more come in. Here's a couple. Lately I've seen AQI spike up even at night. Are there point source pollutants? Are these point source pollutants, or are these the wildfires from California?
That's a good question. I personally have not been looking at, we would have to look at each spike individually because it could be point source, it could be fires from California, it could be local prescribed fires being transported. And sometimes what happens is at nighttime, the smoke kind of gets trapped near the surface, and some of the concentrations can spike at the nighttime. So it could be any of those. And without looking at a specific case, I don't know if I would be able to say for sure what it was.
Okay,
Deanna, did you have a comment on that? No. Okay, I thought I saw her hand.
Oh,
okay.
She does. Hang on one second. Let me turn on her mic. Okay, Deanna, you can unmute now.
Thanks. Yes, Jim, I was just going to add to that I have noticed the AQI sometimes being picked up by local, personal, low quality sensors that people might have in their neighborhoods. And that AQI sometimes gets reported. So it really depends on where you're getting the AQI from. If you're getting it from Air Now or especially from Georgia or South Carolina's websites, those will be what Jim's talking about. But if it's coming from, you're just watching it on your phone or your weather app, we can't guarantee the source of that data. So it may not be reflective of the true air quality index.
Okay, we also had a question. Did DES submit any exceptional events? Since none of our monitors were over 9, we're not allowed to submit any exceptional events. Is that correct, Mary Payton?
That is correct.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, exceptional events are only acted upon by EPA if it makes if they're regulatorily significant, which means they basically bring an area from non-attainment into attainment. And in the case South Carolina, all their monitors are already below 9. Therefore, even if they were to submit an exceptional event, EPA would do nothing with it anyway. And that's also the reason why in Georgia, we submitted 40 for Augusta to bring the design value to 9.0. We're not allowed to submit, 50 instead of 40 and bring the design value down to, 8.5. EPA won't act on them because once you're at 9, you're attainment, and when you're above 9, you're not. So due to regulatory significance, you can only ask for enough exceptional events to get you to the standard, but you're not allowed to ask for additional ones to get you below the standard. And our magic number was 40. So.
Okay, I think Hines and Greg are just confirming what we said already. Okay, has the EPD seen an increase in AQI since Hurricane Helene? We're seeing a lot of fires in the neighborhoods to burn debris.
I don't know if Deanna can answer that. As far as our PM measurements, we still are waiting to get back some of our filter-based measurements to actually see what the data looks like for the last half of the year. So I haven't really noticed AQI, but
Jim,
I don't. Yeah.
I'm pulling up our database, but I have not been made aware of from our ambient monitoring program any spikes in our data that we might be needing to look out for in the filter based on the information we have out there right now.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Do we have anyone who wants to raise their hand and ask a question? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Like I said before, we will be sending the slides out after the meeting. So if there's no other questions, I think we're going to end the meeting. I'm not sure when we'll get back together. I know the 120-day letters is probably the next milestone. So we'll get with Georgia and see if that's something we need to call the group back together about or not. But we will keep you informed of what's going on with everything. So I really like to thank everyone for spending an hour with us this morning. And if you have any other questions, you can let us know. Send us an email. We'll try to get an answer for you. And we look forward to getting back with you at a future date. Oh, somebody sending a message. Oh, it says great update. Thanks, Rob. But we'll get these slides out to everybody, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Valentine's Day is tomorrow. So have a good day, and thanks again for joining us.